It's 7 o'clock on a Sunday night, and you know what that means. It's Topical starts right now. A very good evening to South Africa, those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical. Our digital audience with us tonight, among them our guests, Pikkie, Greeff. Good to have them on the program. Looking forward to getting their questions in a short while for our guests. The South Africa's troop deployment is in sharp focus. Why? We have a contingent as part of the South African or Southern African Development Community's mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And they are there to support and assist government of the DRC in its efforts to bring in peace and security as well as stability in that region. Sadly, there are already fatalities. This week, a mortar bomb landed inside one of the South African contingent military bases. And as a result of this indirect fire, as it was called, in a statement, 2 soldiers were killed. Captain Simon Bobe and Lance Corporal Irvin Simono, both soldiers working for one South African infantry battalion and were deployed with 2 South African infantry battalion. 3 others sustained injuries. Further investigations will be conducted to determine the basis of the incident. And our deepest condolences goes to the families of the deceased soldiers. And our thoughts and prayers to those recovering in a hospital. These are the people, right, who put the safety of others before themselves. It's admirable. Al Jazeera reporting in the past week, fighting between DRC armed forces and the M23 group has forced thousands of people to pack up what belongings they have and carry it and flee, often on foot, to safety areas such as regional capital Goma. Which leads us to the question of the week, and we ask you, what are your thoughts on South Africa's 2,900 strong troop deployment to the DRC? And this is the question: is the South African National Defence Force fit for purpose? Let us know at It's Topical SABC. Let's walk and talk as per normal, get you some context. Is the South African National Defence Force capacitated enough? Are they supported enough? And what does that mean in terms of support? Do they have the necessary support? No doubt, it's important to acknowledge and appreciate and honor those who protect the Republic's territorial integrity and its people. And one way of doing that is to better understand what they do and how they do it. Share your thoughts with us at It's Topical SABC. Perspective coming up. Right, as always, let's get you some context, and we turn to the magic wall. Joining me tonight to flesh out these issues is SABC News international reporter Kylie Kumala. Kai, good to have you.
Well, thank you so much.
Better mind on the program.
Lovely.
The pleasure is all ours. Let's just start off by giving people the context as to why South African troops are in the DRC. What's the reason for the conflict here?
Well, first and foremost, Blaine, I mean, it's a very complex space in the DRC. You look at the eastern part of the country, minerals rich. I mean, you talk about cobalt, very important for the cell phones and the electric cars, but also the ethnic rivalry as well. I mean, some of the very just issues here goes back to the issues post the Rwandan genocide. So you've had all these rivalries really happening between the ethnicities, but also apart from that, what is key about what is happening in the DRC is that also the issue of the minerals scarce. So that has been really a very big issue in this regard.
Right. So a lot of people don't realize Democratic Republic of Congo in Central Africa, but they fall under the Southern African Development Community, SADC, right? Talk to us about the regional forces that are currently in the DRC.
So what is very important in this regard, Blaine, is that you do have the United Nations-led mission, MONUSCO. Right. South Africa is one of the contributing countries in terms of the troops and many other countries as well. So in light of all these events that you have seen in the DRC, there's a belief that, MONUSCO is not really cracking this because we see the instability, we see the resurgence of M23, which is a very big concern. So that's why now the Southern African leaders decided to have this new mission that is going to succeed MONUSCO, with South Africa obviously contributing about 2,900 troops. So some of the countries that are very instrumental here, very much so. Obviously, South Africa is very key, Malawi as well, and Tanzania as well. So these are three countries that will make sure that there is stability in the eastern parts of Congo. But in terms of success, it's still quite a very big question.
Right. Let's just talk about success, or the lack thereof. Talk to us about some of the South African National Defence Force's missions since 1999.
Obviously, Blaine, I mean, with a new democratic South Africa, I think they had to reconfigure how the South African Defence Force or the National Defence Force works in terms of peacemaking, peace process, as opposed to the SADF during the apartheid era that was violating the sovereignty of other countries with the illegal raids. I mean, you look at what we have seen, for example, in Sudan, you know, in Darfur region with the genocide that's happened. South Africa was very instrumental in terms of maintaining of peace as well. But also you go back as well to Burundi, country that's close to the DRC as well. I think also for them this time around, the big fear is around the spillover effect. So if you have a conflict in a country within the Great Lakes region, the spillover effect in terms of the refugees who are running to other countries as well. So for example, you do have about 80,000 Congolese who are right in Burundi. But of course, DRC as well. South Africa has been very instrumental. From the time of South Africa, we've seen the peace agreement signed in Sun City. We've seen so many ceasefires, but all of them have been violated. And of course, a main one, Blaine. I mean, right in Mozambique, in the northern parts of Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado, where also Mozambique is battling the issue of extremism, terrorism. It's a very big issue. South Africa as well is one of the contributing countries. So there has been some successes where they've recaptured some villages and some towns, but also challenges, because SANDF is really facing a myriad of challenges. And right here in Lesotho as well, Blaine, you know, a country really that doesn't know any other neighbor other than South Africa. South Africa as well has been very instrumental in terms of making sure that there is stability in that particular country.
Somebody that knows all too well the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo is former President Thabo Mbeki. He was speaking to international editor Sophie Mokoena, who basically asked him, you know, what's the possible solutions here? Pointing out the fact that this is a political problem which probably needs a political solution.
Well, that's right, Blaine. That's what former President Mbeki indicated, especially because when you look at the African Union, for example, they have appointed the Angolan president, João Lorenzo, who's also their SADC chairperson, to try and look at how can this be resolved. You know, you do have two processes, for example. You do have the Nairobi process, but also you do have the Luanda process. All of these processes, really, they are meant to try and bring stability. For example, we do know of the tension between the DRC and Rwanda. For example, you had President Tshisekedi, when he was campaigning, he was saying, look, he's going to go to parliament and declare war against Rwanda, something that's very worrisome, because if this conflict really escalates, that particular region may implode. And I think that's the context where former President Mbeki is really reaffirming and reiterating that what we do need here is a political settlement. So military operations, we've been there, and really we haven't really seen them yielding any particular positive outcome.
I just want to talk a bit about the current situation in the DRC and the certain organizations that are there. We heard about MONUSCO, UN-backed, and reportedly they've been there for over 20 years, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Then the East African community. Talk to us about why is there a shift away from that group?
It was quite a very significant moment, Blaine, when the East African community decided to have this particular mission in the DRC. So it was supposed to test their ability to counter the insurgency. So this was quite a very good experiment by the leaders from East Africa, because as much as DRC is part of SADC region, but also is part of the East African community, so they enjoy this dual membership. So it was quite a very important moment. But the accusation from Kinshasa Kinshasa was that some of the troops from East African community were colluding with the M23 rebels. So that's what really caused the discord and the dissatisfaction. So that's why, in fact, something that was quite worrisome, even during the elections, we didn't see the observer mission going to the DRC, something that was quite bizarre. But that's a very key indication so far that we know.
So the big question, I guess, is what can SADC troops, including the 2,900, and I understand that it's a phased-in deployment, can do that this group can't. I will put that to the experts in a short while. Talk to us about the humanitarian issues around here.
It's very catastrophic. I mean, already you talk about 7 million people who have been displaced. And I mean, this has been the epicenter of all these conflicts in the DRC, whether you're talking about from the time of Mobutu Sese to Laurent Kabila Sr. to Joseph Kabila. Now you do have Tshisekedi, but the humanitarian crisis is absolutely devastating. So many people are displaced. And also, what is so concerning in this regard, Blaine, is that these internally displaced people really are scattered all over, and obviously there is no shelter. Even in some of the refugee camps, that's where we also see the constant attacks. Really just a massive issue. And never mind that, you know, this is the area that is incredibly rich in terms of the minerals. But when you look at the current conditions there, it's absolutely awful.
Nobody can provide context like you do, sir. Better mind indeed. Value added and a plus for the audience. Thank you. All right, that was SABC News international reporter Kylie Lekomalo. They're giving us context. Important indeed. We will discuss further. Let's get your take on this. Our regular Word on the Street feature. We took to the streets, various streets of Gauteng, to get your take. And this is what people had to say. Watch.
In any military operations, there are casualties that you're going to pick up, right? It might be a mistake of the South African government, or sometimes it's a mistake of the very soldiers on combat, you see. So we feel very sorry as South Africans because these are our brothers and sisters, right? But what's done is done.
If you're going to have casualties where we lose soldiers, and for intervening in a war that we can't even account or know, even give an assessment as to why are we so engaged, then it defeats the purpose of what the country is trying to build, especially with the coming elections, when there's so much uncertainty as to where we're going as a country.
Lots of countries agree that they will help keep peace in other countries whenever there are conflicts. So you're almost obliged to do your bit in terms of keeping peace where you can. But you need to be able to send people who are capable of doing that, and ideally without themselves getting killed.
Speaking of the recent fatalities, I can't really say much, but what I do know is that siyasebenzisana at the end of the day, so it's more of a tit for tat kind of a situation. If they don't, then that means that DRC will never come to our rescue should we need them.
I think those soldiers, maybe they should deploy them here in our country to solve our problems before they can go and solve other people's problems.
We lost. That's what I can say. We lost a lot when coming to our country, especially if you lost one soldier. It's the same as you lost the whole country, you understand? Because a soldier for us is someone who stands for our country.
It's important that you give us your thoughts. Helps us process in a way that we might not have thought about, and also helps shape the strategy on a way to a better place, right? Important. Thank you very much indeed. I want to get to this now, this insert, and please be warned that this story contains graphic content. From being born in a forest, fleeing out of fear of being killed, to being orphaned and raped. These are some of the harrowing experiences shared by a Congolese couple living in South Africa. Our producer, Mark Eketla-Motlape, joined them as they watched the developments in their country. Take a look.
A family haunted by the horror of their past.
It's too much when I look.
Born in a conflict-torn DRC.
We were ambushed.
The latest developments mirror 47-year-old Nicole Lukusa Chifuaka-Buasa's ordeal in 1992.
I was raped by militias. They had pangas, they had knives. So no one could stand for us.
It was at the time of a political and ethnical conflict.
It was just like that time of Kyungwa Kumwanza wanting to chase all the people from Kasai, and then the militias came. They pick young ladies, I was among, taking turn.
The mother of four says she has never received any justice.
They need to know their places and go back wherever they are coming. They can't be killing innocent kids and women and men in the DRC. This is too much.
Buaza's story intertwines with her husband's.
Stop immediately.
People were killed. Thousands of people were killed. People were raped, but no trial. And until today, there's no trial for the Congolese people that are dying. I've got tears. I don't know what's going to happen to our children tomorrow. Will we still have a land?
John Buasa was born at the height of an impossible battle.
All the villages in our site were burnt down by Mobutu and his people.
And he doesn't remember his deceased parents. He only remembers he was born and bred in a forest.
My mom had to run into the forest to hide for almost 9 months. She gave birth to me and died, so that I was left alone at the bank of the river with my grandmother, who was shedding tears, always brought me up. We have had enough.
And a family's collective plea amid a devastating conflict.
And those that are leading us, why can't they just stop it?
Stop this greediness. Just like Rwanda, we will recover eventually. The Democratic Republic of Congo needs independence.
Until then,
La République démocratique du Congo entre tes saintes mains.
the family will keep holding hands to seek higher powers.
Amen.
For its Topical, Amari Getlamutlabe, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Why can't they just stop it? It's often the simplest questions that have the most complex answers. Let's discuss. We've got a number of guests here, the better minds on the program to help us understand this. And how sustainable is an external force in a country, given the current situation? Let me introduce my guest. Advocate Pikkie Greeff is the National Secretary of the South African National Defence Union, as well as Jasmine Opperman, who is a security analyst. Thank you very much indeed. Also our digital audience here, they'll obviously be throwing in their comments and questions to our guests. Thank you all. Let's have a fruitful discussion. Pikkie, if I can start with you first. Sending soldiers into harm's way, no doubt you can't take that lightly. And I don't for one instance think that the Commander-in-Chief will take that lightly. But in terms of support for a successful mission, from your assessment, what is needed at this stage?
Well, yes, firstly, let me express our condolences, of course, to the deceased, speedy recovery to those wounded. Of course, the Chief SNF would never send soldiers willfully in harm's way. But at this stage, there are certain concerns that experts are raising. The issue that there is little to no air support currently in the DRC to the deployment. The issue that certain teams that could have been deployed at this stage, like anti-water teams and so on, have not yet gone there. Those are concerns that are validly raised by experts.
All right. I've covered a lot of armed forces days to know and hear and respect the ace, which is often how it's referred to up South Africans' sleeves, is the Rooivalk. What do we know about that machine? Is it available for deployment?
There's no Rooivalk available for deployment at this stage. And that is one of the big concerns. If one had the capability to, of the Rooivalk to give air cover and launch air attacks and counterattacks and so on, that would have been a huge force multiplier. We saw the effectivity of the efficacy of the Rooivalk in 2015 when it was deployed. Also after soldiers asked for it, and it was rather successfully deployed against the M23 rebels. In fact, for a short while, if I'm not mistaken, it damped their spirits quite and it was quite effective. It's after the Royfolk stopped operating, and the Ukrainians also withdrew a huge air support when their war broke out. That's when things started going a bit south.
Just explain to us why it's not available.
Well, it's maintenance issues. It costs money to keep a Royfolk in the air, and there's maintenance issues, there's budget issues, and it's quite simply a thing that the Royfolk, there hasn't been enough money, to put it simply, to service enough Royfolks in order for us to keep them operational.
Right. Jasmine, the constrained fiscal environment is putting a lot of pressure on various components of the state. I was reading what the president said late last year with regards to the budget constraints, and he said the South African National Defence Force has prioritized its activities to optimize the effectiveness and efficiency of all aspects of the defence organisation. But what does this mean in terms of the fiscal constraint? What does it mean in practical terms on the ground for this defence force? Jasmine, if you can unmute, please. It's almost there. All right, Jasmine, I'll come back to you if you can just unmute. As soon as I see your mic open, I'll come back to you. Let's get, Siraj, if you can get your take with regards to, look, what more information, to what extent do you think the South African public needs to know about deployments such as that going to the DRC?
Hi, thanks for having me. First, we wish condolences to the bereaved families. Well, there's so many things going on in this conflict. I think the first thing is South Africa government has committed a terrible mistake to get involved in this conflict, because remember, this is citizens are fighting in between. So, but then you got South African government who limiting information to go out to the public when life is get involved. So, look, I've heard what head of communication and the defense forces said 3 days ago, Mr. I think it's Sifiwe Dlamini.
Yeah.
To say South Africa forces they got bombed when they are in a camp in northern Kivu, that's not true. Definitely not true. The numbers give away is questionable. People who died. Obviously, there's a way it can be verified if you want to. But the unconfirmed report, there is 12 more dead South African soldiers.
Yeah.
On the top of 2 he reported, and the 3 injured.
Well,
and to say,
we did, just to put on record, we did invite the South African National Defence Force spokesperson. They weren't available for comment. We'll obviously have to pursue what you're saying. Siraj, I'll come back to you in a short while. Jasmine, let me pick up where I left off with you with regards to if a military is operating in a constrained environment in terms of a fiscal environment, what sort of practical, real consequences are there on the ground?
We have seen this firsthand in Cabo Delgado and Mozambique. If we're going to talk about having a sufficient budget, the answer is, what do we need in terms of our military capability? What is it that is going to make a difference wherever they are deployed? Already in Cabo Delgado, much different dynamics than in the DRC. We have seen how logistical constraints, we have seen how the lack of air support has negated the successes of Samam. And I want to add here the diplomatic impact of, for instance, South Africa and Rwanda. Now we're moving into the DRC. Year after year, our budget is being cut in terms of a defense force. Yet we deployed 2,000 soldiers. MONUSCO at its highest had 13,000 to 16,000 soldiers. What can we expect them to achieve? I don't have any high expectations. Simply because of the budget cuts that is not allowing sufficient capability. But I need to make an exception here. What is interesting is that the special forces in South Africa, a strategic asset, has made a difference in Cabo Delgado. The question, though, is, will they make a difference?
Right.
And then, to add to the complexity, I have serious reservations about the whole concept of peacekeeping, because what happens is your peacekeeping forces get sucked into the dynamics of the conflict, and in the DRC, this is most likely going to happen. Diplomatic level, economic level, minerals, economic interests, and the interest of the DRC government.
When you say being sucked into those various elements, in what practical terms?
At the end of the day, the military as soldiers is being guided by your political leadership and in terms of what they want to achieve and their goals. Right. They're not an independent force. So whatever happens now between Rwanda and South Africa, and we know diplomatically there's not good relationships between them, whatever happens between South Africa and the East African community. Remember, we're talking two regional blocks. One is being pushed in, one is going to go inside. How is the East African community going to respond to Southern Africa presence in the DRC? These dynamics are going to directly impact on how the soldiers operate. And keep in mind, we are talking about mercenaries being present in that area, coming from Eastern Europe, protecting the mineral interest. We are talking more than 120 militia groups, not necessarily political or extremist. Right. We are talking about the Islamic State present in that region. And herein, how are you going to separate diplomacy, politics, ideology, and how it directs our soldiers' behavior and operations?
Right.
I am skeptical.
Pikkie, what about other SADC countries? Earlier on, Kai mentioned 3 regional forces that are currently in the DRC, Malawi, Tanzania, South Africa now. What about other countries, lending their support in terms of air support, etc.? Wouldn't that bolster this force?
No, obviously it would bolster the force, but I think the reality that has become quite clear over the past few weeks, as experts would also point out to you, is that the reality is, even though it's called a SADC mission, it is actually being run by the SANDF, and that some other countries are just providing minimal support. And I think that might be a problem. There should be more support, and we definitely, whatever the solution is, definitely our troops need more support.
Right. So is air support the issue here, Pikkie?
I think it's about one of the issues, but it's a very important one. Anybody who has some knowledge about combat will know that air superiority is very important, right, especially when you're fighting an enemy that hides itself in the jungle. You need those eyes in the sky, and of course the Rooivalk has some capabilities. For instance, it can see the enemy even through thick cloud cover, and the enemy doesn't know necessarily that it's present.
Jasmine, you mentioned the number of MONUSCO forces that were present in the DRC. And South Africa is not coming into this blind, isn't it? I was listening to Piers Pigu from the ISS saying that South Africa has been present in that space for about 11 years, albeit under the UN hat. So it goes back to what sort of difference can this force... Are you confident that the force that South Africa is sending will make a huge difference?
If one looks at MONUSCO and at their successes, and if one looks at M23 after they've taken Goma in 2012, and we see a slow rundown of their capabilities, which actually led to some conclusions that they're over and done with, comes in the politics we are talking about, not satisfied that the peace agreement, the demilitarization and the incorporation into the military was adhered to, and within 2 to 3 years, M23 is presenting a significant force that is now resulting in where we stand today. So I am afraid to say, if you are talking about our current force deployment making a significant difference, what do I mean by difference? It is not a silver bullet. It is not a solution. The same in Cabo Delgado. It was never meant as a silver bullet, but it must enable a situation for what our former President Thabo Mbeki referred to as a political dialogue.
Right.
The environment must be conducive. I cannot foresee with the current capabilities and deployment that they can even achieve such an environment in gaining a political solution. And I'm not blaming the soldiers.
Yeah.
They are committed and loyal soldiers. Don't get me wrong here, please. It is simply that they are being thrown into a complex environment, which I'm afraid is going to be a long-term deployment with high casualties.
Pikkie, before I go to my digital audience, I just wanted to pick up on this point, which I found interesting, the statement that the South African National Defence Force released, calling it, those soldiers that died through an indirect fire. What does that tell us about the circumstances in which they died?
I think indirect fire simply refers to a form of warfare with with artillery and mortars, where the person firing the weapon doesn't necessarily have eyes on the target. And so, they're firing in the general vicinity of where they think the target might be and hoping that it'll hit something. And that's what indirect fire means. And if the SANDF report is correct, then that is what happened in this instance. So obviously, one does that kind of thing to test the reaction capability and to see what it does to the morale of the forces being fired upon. And we are now at the stage where the proverbial ball is in our court, and we will need to come out with a strong response. Otherwise, expect more of it.
Yeah. Let's go to digital audience. Lungile?
Yeah, thank you, Hermans, also to the panelists. My perspective on this Congo war, Hermans, you'll remember that it's a common cause that it's been 2 decades having this war back from 1996. So up to date, it's also happening. One also need to establish what is the cause of this war. You also hear from the reporters that the minerals of there in Congo, people are willing to misplace the people and also cause instability politically and economically, so that they can take whatever is remaining there so that they can benefit themselves. So what we are also calling for is for the SADC to intervene, also the African Union, also the United States, to ensure that there is a ceasefire and a peace, so that at the end of the day, we have a peace in the world, unlike we are always experiencing war.
Right.
Yeah, that's my perspective.
Lungile, thank you very much indeed. Let's hear from Mpho.
I have 3 questions. These are going to be directed to our experts.
Go on.
The first one is, according to your knowledge, which initiatives has the South African National Defence Force employed in the local communities that they are deployed in order to improve their efforts of peace building? The other one would be then, how does the deployment of the SANDF contribute to the effects aimed at peace building, promoting stability, as well as development in the Eastern Congo? And then the last one would be, how does the SANDF engage with the authorities, the local authorities in Eastern Congo, the civil society organizations, as well as other stakeholders, in order to enhance their mission of making sure that the communities are safe, as well as peace building.
Right. Mpho, thank you very much. And let me throw a few to Jasmine and then Pikkie. Jasmine, to you first, maybe the last one first, in terms of the SANDF's interaction with the locals and how they plan to carry out their mission.
I have not seen any specific plans in terms of how they're going to do it in the DRC, but I think if I can just go back to Cabo Delgado and Mozambique, one of the key lessons learned with the initial deployment was the lack of understanding of the local culture, the local dynamics, and the local engagement with communities. Rwanda, simply because they could communicate Swahili, enabled them to build a relationship of trust with these communities. Without such a trust in a local context, you are going to get nowhere. Now, I do not know if there has been a phase in which our soldiers have actually been trained and exposed to such local dynamics. If you talk about local authorities, and it's a very important question, keep in mind, we're talking about, as the previous speaker mentioned, a long-standing conflict. Most of these local militias, ADF, M23, intermarried, they are part of the communities, their children have grown up in these communities, and when you start talking to local authorities, the first question will be, who am I actually talking to? Is this local person claiming to represent a community sincere, or am I talking to the enemy that wanted to kill me yesterday? And that's the reality in the DRC and the complexity. Just one comment in terms of peace building. All the military can do is what is being referred to as a negative peace. Bring down the casualties, bring down humanitarian disasters. But the actual peace building process, I firmly, and it's my opinion, lies beyond what the SANDF can do. That requires a spider web of interventions that is coordinated. And to get to that point in the DRC, not within the next 5 years. I'm sorry, I can't see it happening.
Pikkie, you agree?
No, I'm afraid I have to. The fact of the matter is the SANDF is not there. Well, let's start off by saying that primarily there to fill the mission, and the mission is basically to get rid of these armed forces, to destroy them. That is the mission. Let's just face the reality here. I don't think one should picture it as a peacekeeping mission anymore. This new mission that's underway is simply to neutralize these armed forces that are operating in the eastern DRC. That's the reality. And so it's exactly right. Community building and community outreach and that kind of thing is something that is beyond the SANDF's mandate. They're not sent there to do that. And so, yeah, it's a bit of a disconnect, in my view, that, you've got the military operating there on the one hand, and then the other side of things is apparently being left to chance.
Yeah. Gentlemen, ladies, stand by. We're going to come back with regards to trying to flesh out what this all means. I was listening to Defense Analyst Helmut Heitman telling the SABC that there's nothing wrong with regards to our soldiers. But if we don't have the equipment or the funding to get that equipment and make it work, then what's the point? They can't do their job. We're going to discuss that to the extent of how that affects our soldiers on the ground with our experts. Quick break, more next. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical, and the question we're asking you this week is, what are your thoughts on South Africa's 2,900 strong troop deployment to the Democratic Republic of Congo? And the second part is the South African National Defence Force fit for purpose? This is what you had to say.
You go down there to the borders of South Africa, it's where we almost need soldiers. That budget that is sent the soldiers to DRC with is the budget that we are looking for to take care of our borders, to take care of those drugs that are roaming around the street, to take care of the people who are killing each other, those guns that are roaming, illegal guns that are roaming the street.
All African Union, they have to know who support the rebel with the material like rocket, jet flight, missiles. They have to check where come from those things. Which country supporting the rebels? What is the reason to support the rebels?
All right, really appreciate your thoughts at It's Topical SABC. Let's go back to our panel of experts as well as our digital audience. Let's go to Advocate Greeff. And I was listening to, as I said, Helmut Heitman, and he was giving us some statistics that he had. And I'll ask Control to just put it up so the viewers can get a sense of what we're talking about in terms of the South African National Defence Force deployment in numbers. And he was going through a number of aspects. He said over 30,000 plus in total. Infantry, there's about 15,000. In terms of those involved in tracing illegal miners, over 3,000. We know about the deployment, just under 3,000 to the DRC border control, deployed to Mozambique, about 1,500, and about 900 protecting power stations. Given those numbers, if those numbers are indeed the actual numbers that are the reality on the ground, how overstretched, given the budget, how overstretched is the South African National Defence Force, Advocate?
On a scale of 1 to 10, probably 11.
And
that's a short and simple reality.
And if you, is it as simple as throwing money at, look, we're coming up to a budget happening this week. Is it as simple as giving the Defence Force more funds, or what else is needed to augment?
Well, I think let's just start with giving the Defence Force more funds instead of cutting it every year for the past decade. And our appeals in this regard and our urges to the politicians to stop cutting the Defence Force budget, because you're effectively tying soldiers' hands behind their backs. It's just been falling on deaf ears. The people in the military are more than capable of managing a budget and managing it correctly, but then they should have money in the budget to manage it. One of the other things is, of course, because of all these budget cuts and the poor maintenance or the neglect of maintenance that was inflicted through these budget cuts over more than a decade, it means also that some of your equipment has now become entirely useless. It cannot be fixed. It has to be replaced. And that, of course, implicates even more money that has to be spent. So we're in this downward spiral, and I'm afraid at this stage there's not a very good outcome to this whole thing unless we seriously sit down as South Africans and consider, do we want to keep on with these deployments? Well, in that case, we better start funding and equipping it, or are we going to scale down according to what we have? In that case, we are going to have a very, very weak and small defence force.
Jasmine, apart from the international commitments, the South African National Defence Force protects the integrity of the country, the territorial integrity. There's border surveillance, there's disaster management capabilities, etc. Do you think more funding will help in this regard? And to what extent?
As the previous speaker has indicated, at least let's just turn around and start getting more budget allocations. But please, even if we increase the budget by 50%, let's say after the budget speech, it is going to take years in terms of getting our equipment back up to standard. It is going to take 30 years of neglect that needs some catching up. So and the South African government, and if they want to play a role in peacekeeping missions, the first phase must be sit down, plan, what do we need from our military in terms of a successful deployment. In terms of just one comment, if you would allow me, sir.
Go on.
The fact that we have they being stretched on a domestic basis. ESCOM, you've mentioned it, borders, zamas, is a serious concern. Remember, this is our last resort. We are falling back on the military to maintain law and order, which is the police function. If this fails, what is left? There is no more falling back than relying on the military. Then we need to quickly redefine how we see and activate the military and their personnel in terms of both domestic and international participation.
I see hands up already. Let's go to Knowledge, Jeff, then Impo. Knowledge? Go on, Knowledge. Oops, you just muted Knowledge. Let's try it one more time. There we go.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. And I would like to start by saying deepest condolences to South Africa at large, because the military which was lost, it belongs to South Africans. Then I would like to mention the fact that the DRC mission, it's a different ballgame together, unlike the COVID-19 mission and also the power station, because this has been ongoing for a long time. One speaker asked why the SADC countries are not intervening.
Right.
So it is crucial to note that at one point you had countries like Zimbabwe sending their soldiers, and they had so many casualties in DRC. So that is why currently they are hesitant to send their soldiers there. So it's not an easy task, especially for 2,900 men. But all we can do is wish them all the best and encourage the government, especially the politicians, because at the end of the day, history has shown that they stand to benefit more than anyone, because the soldiers will not benefit much from these activities. So we encourage the politicians to really support the military with all the resources which they need. Otherwise, the mission is not easy. Thank you very much.
Right, Knowledge, thank you very much indeed. Jeff and then Paul. Jeff, to you first. If you can unmute Jeff. Oops, Jeff is muted. We'll come back to you, Jeff. And Paul, go ahead.
So one question will go to Jasmine and the other one will go to Pikkie. So to Jasmine, the question will be, because we lack logistical and air support, are there any other means the SANDF can employ in order to ensure more safety for the soldiers that have been deployed? And then to Pikkie, I wanted to ask, what are the possible short-term and long-term repercussions of deploying an under-equipped military, especially given that within the past it has been made public knowledge that the military is under-equipped? Is there possible vulnerabilities that we would face from other role players because this is public knowledge?
All right. And Paul, thank you very much indeed. We've just got about 2 minutes, so if I can ask Jasmine and Pikkie to keep your answers as brief as possible. Jasmine, to you first, with regards to, other than air support, what else does South Africa need in this mission? Jasmine?
Yes, I'm unmuted. Just in a quick, even if we are talking about logistical and air support, I cannot foresee any other way of supporting our soldiers in terms of the deployment. That is how you get it. Keep in mind, if you talk Rwanda, they're just across the border. Burundi is just across the border. They can quickly and in a very short period of time provide such support to the groups they are supporting. For South Africa, we're talking thousands of kilometers, and that is a highly complex issue in terms of providing quick response to our soldiers if they are in crisis.
Jasmine, thank you. Pikkie, with regards to the short-term and long-term repercussions of issues with equipment, funding, etc.
I think the repercussions are clear. I think the speaker asked the question that, does it make us more vulnerable because it's public knowledge? And the answer is yes, of course it does. That doesn't mean we should stop speaking about it. I think we should never stop wanting to support our troops, and we should never stop pushing those powers that be to support our troops and to think outside the box. That's all I can answer to that.
Right. Pikkie, thank you very much indeed. Jeff, final word to you, sir. Oops. Go ahead, Jeff. Let's try last. I don't want to leave the show without speaking to you, Jeff. Go on.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yes. Thank you very much for having me. But I don't know where to start. But let me say that I heard someone saying that it is a conflict between citizens of Congo. It is a total lie. Because you remember that when President Tshisekedi took power, when he came into power, he asked all the armed groups to unite as one and to talk about their own issues. They were taken to Nairobi, except the M23, because the government of DRC knows very well that M23 is supported by Rwanda. Even the UN Secretary General said that these rebels, they have sophisticated artillery, which is like a professionally trained national army. Yeah. So they're not really rebels. We know that Rwanda is going behind the M23 to try to invade the mineral-rich countries with the help of the multinationals based in Rwanda, because Rwanda does not produce coltan, they don't produce cobalt, they don't produce all other strategic minerals.
All right, and Jeff, again, we have to end it there. Thank you very much, and that's Jeff's point of view. If you could only hear what's happening in my ear, Jeff. Thank you very much indeed, though, for your thoughts and your point of view, your perspective. Jasmine and Pikkie, appreciated, value added, no doubt. To all my digital audience, we'll get to chat to you once again. We thank them very much indeed for their time. All right, here's my take before we go. The constitutional mandate of this country's defense force is to defend and protect the Republic of South Africa, its territorial integrity and its people. There are also international commitments, and in this instance, towards the Southern African Development Community's mission to support the Democratic Republic of Congo. Peacekeeping and peace-building efforts on the African continent. Our soldiers often brave great dangers. Questions. Is our defense force fully capacitated to effectively pursue peace around the world and, when needed, here at home? And how do we weigh up domestic needs such as border surveillance and disaster management capabilities on one hand, and then the international deployments on the other? There's a need to stay connected to the rest of the continent. Sound diplomatic relations are important. Adopting a policy of remaining apart from the affairs of other countries on the continent might be seen as myopic, right, by some. So then, there's a pressing need to get stronger. And you've heard some of the solutions raised here tonight with regards to budgets, etc. The big takeaway for me is the security and the stability that a strong military tends to offer a nation. Someone once said that having a defense force is like having an insurance policy you hope you never require, right? But if and when we do need them, you would hope that they are fully capacitated and fully supported. And that's my take. If you miss anything on this program, be sure to watch this episode of It's Topical on YouTube. Sports Live up next. If you're watching a repeat of this program, then as always, the news continues. Until next week, my brothers and sisters, take care. Bye-bye.